Right, okay, right. Well, I will declare the meeting open. Welcome everyone, and anyone who happens to be viewing us streaming. We have apologies from Councillor Gillespie. Yeah. We need to, oh, okay, yep. I will move, we accept that apology. So you have a second there. Okay, all those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Against? Carried. Okay. Confirmations of minutes of the meeting 1 October 2001. Any comments or amendments? No. I will so move that we approve those minutes. Like to second that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Aye.
Thank you. Against? Carried. You can hear us okay, Tim?
Yeah, perfectly. Thank you, Linda.
Sorry, I forgot to just check. And I were okay. Cool. Okay. So first item in the department now, declarations of interest.
I've got a couple of changes. They're not relevant to today, but I'll forward them through to Rebecca for this and council as well.
Brilliant. Okay. Any other adjustments from anyone else? No. Don't need to move that, do we? No. Okay. First up, we have the policy register.
So I've got the policy register for you today. There's not been a huge amount of change since the last time you saw it, but I do need to start with apologies because at that stage there were 3 policies due to come to the committee that we had to move. That's the staff interest policy review. That one has been delayed due to the pressures on the human resources team, part of recruitment, and a huge amount getting us ready for the orange traffic light system. The other are towing out information services. It's the Lagoima policy and the privacy policy, and we've had somebody on leave. Other than that, we've had a couple of policies updated in the last couple of months. Smoke-free and vape-free policy with council at its last meeting, and you have the asset management policy on the register today. I've also gone through the policy register, taken every overdue policy, checked if it's still relevant, and if so, programmed it for any day. So the next step there for the register will be to find a way to show which ones are out of date and whether correct.
Great. Yeah, probably just need to highlight them in some way. We're doing a great job in keeping it all tidy, which is really good. And see, but we're just saying previously we had our chat 14, and it's getting very tidy. It's great. Good amount of work. Any questions?
Yes, Madam Chair. Do we contemplate, given the situation that we're Sanchez facing, having a vaccination policy, or is that just going to be worked through? Given everything will probably change underneath us. Just a general question. I'm not stating a need for one. I'm just wondering.
Let's answer that.
I'll answer that. I don't think it's for Alex to answer that.
Well, she keeps track of them. She doesn't create them.
Actually, on Monday, we'll be going out for consultation with staff on the development of a vaccination policy. That consultation will include a draft vaccination policy based on a risk assessment that we've made this week. And then at the moment, the sort of indicative plan is that we'll consult until the middle of the week after, subject to change. So we're just not putting a date on it just yet. But that will be the plan, meeting.
Okay, and the way it fits within the framework, it would be a CEO policy, or would it be a council policy?
It would be a CEO policy. I think there is a question there that we need to address on whether it includes elected members.
Mm-hmm.
And if it does include elected members, then they would be included in the consultation period as well. There may ultimately be quite rapid decisions need to be made about further council facilities, including council meetings, etc. So yeah, probably the easiest thing to do, well, I'll speak to elected members more about this, is to consult with elected members and front foot it rather than reactively go back and do it. It just gives us a chance to know if we have to arrange meetings with provisions for people who are not vaccinated. Help with that.
Yeah, but it would be a CEO approved policy. Whilst council laws are involved in.
It would be in terms of my obligation as DCBU.
Yeah.
But hopefully endorsed and supported by council.
Oh, yeah. Cool. Yep. Okay. Yeah, I think just evolving the register, because at the moment it shows us the now due date.
Yeah.
Which is not the actual due date.
It's very policy, but there is a few from the past I want to check, so that will be done at once together with the next.
Yeah, yeah. So maybe there's a way just to even just. We're now scheduling it, for example, I'm not saying it's late, but the privacy policy May 22, but it's red showing that it's been deferred from when it should be, or something like that, just to highlight those. So if we look at it and there's no red, then we know we're all up to date, kind of thing. That would be helpful. Yeah,
Through the chief. And it comes through the long-term planning process. I will check all of those to make sure they're aligned. And the policy state that one of the ones you asked about was the investment and liability. They're pre-agenda and they were not a 12-month soft review. So we'll check that everything ties back to the key documents.
no, it's looking good. And we've got a few obviously coming to us next year, so that's good as well. Okay. Any further questions? Right, well, I also move that we see the report. Thank you. All those in favour?
Aye.
Carried. Thank you. Thanks, Agnes. Okay, so we're moving on to page 23, risk register. Gabby?
Hi.
Over to you.
Just while Gabby's sitting, this one's been a long time in the coming. I know that during my time here you've been looking for it, but I'm hoping you'll like the format of where we've got to so far. Gabby's put in quite a bit of time and energy and then trying to do what she calls the dashboard and then the actual register. And handing it over to them.
So I'm taking the paper as read. As you can see, both the strategic risk register dashboard and the strategic risk register have been provided in a draft form. So as mentioned, these documents remain under development with the information required for the dashboard yet to be fully worked through by the executive team. So the next step requires the information within the dashboard to be completed, and the risk owner needs to be identified, as well as a workshop which is to be undertaken by the executive team to determine the risk rating.
Just got a couple of points or queries. One's why the risk owners are always XXX. I presume that just hasn't been assigned yet, yeah? Sorry.
This to me is what you've got is each risk has its own template and you're using that to populate the template to, and then that flows into the risk register.
Yeah.
Me, that's not what a risk dashboard is. My expectation is the dashboard is then you take your register and you're summarising up the risks to give us sort of more of a health check on where things are. Having said that, these as your base documents for recording each risk are really good. So it's more just sort of what my expectation is of the dashboard needs to be a high level representation of the risks, the strategic risks that the council face. It's not what these are. But these are your templates, you know, your actual template that you're populating to capture the risk that then gets summarised in the risk register. The risk register then needs to get somehow distilled into a dashboard. So sort of as more of a one-page kind of way, we can look at it. Yeah. So, but good work here. I did note though that the risk register and the dashboard, call them dashboards, they don't line up. So what's called risk number one here is not risk number one here, which isn't given a priority. But if you're going to run two systems, you even in the beginning, you can't have this disjoint. And a lot of the controls that are listed in detail in what you're calling the dashboard, some of the detail here is different. So you haven't got continuity of the information. You might want to summarise and have less detail in here and have more detail there. But when I read on one, and I can't remember the example now, but I read sort of the controls in here and the controls in there on what claimed to be the same risk, there wasn't consistency.
Yeah, that would be my mistake.
But you know, but that's the discipline. If you're going to have two sources of, you've got to have one source of, well, one constant source of information. And if because a lot of people don't have the templates, they just put everything in here. I'm not saying you don't have to, but you can't have two bits of information unless the risk register is more of a summary of the deeper detail.
Which is how I believe we expect of it. The
The
movement will be in the register, 1 to 10, whatever, however many we've got, whereas those templates are the founding documents behind any of those. They won't change any whether they are the founding documents. This will change as our risks move, surely.
yes, I'm not talking about the order of them, I'm talking about the risk number that identifies them. So if you're wanting to find risk number, because it's not risk number one because it's the most important risk, it's risk number one. Here is climate change on the register, and in here it's health and safety and wellbeing.
Yeah. Can I just
Just
to clarify, because that number one eventually will be our top risk.
okay, then that's not, no.
Will it not?
No, you can't do it that way, because you've got to number them to identify them.
Would that not be done under the top level?
Well, maybe, yeah, but
And
so that was
an environmental consideration is number, whatever it is in the template, but the risk number should be our top priority. I would
okay.
put the
Then
red
that's,
feature at the top.
then that's a ranking again, and that might be what you put in your dash, how you do it in your dashboard. But if you're using the number as an identifier, which I do encourage you to do, because everyone will say, oh, it's number 5, it's number 5, you know, 5. You want the detail, so it's just to do it. Now, the risk register hasn't been it's been populated with the risks, but you haven't done the assessments in use now. Okay. Yeah. When do you plan? What's the next steps in getting this actual risk assessments?
So we'll be having a workshop. I will be having a workshop and figuring out what it's going is and going through the risk rating. Yes, steps there, so it can come.
Okay. I can see progress. The other thing, when I look back at the policy as well, so the risk reporting that's required is above and beyond just receiving the risk register. So when will we start seeing actual the risk reporting as per the policy? Outside accepted tolerance levels, escalating risks, emerging risks, and significant project risks.
From my experience, we get the risk rating sorted.
Yep.
And then we'll start to look at that.
Okay, so that would be sort of, we've been working to, it's more sort of what your plans are. So we'd be sort of mid next year, we'd be starting to see more of that sort of broader risk reporting. And perhaps in the February meeting, we'll get the first cut at the risk register. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay, any more questions, Tim?
Oh, there was just a couple of acronyms used in the always with IT, isn't it? But I don't think it really matters that they're there. I find it irritating when I'm reading something and I haven't got a bloody clue what it means, but it's relevant to the overall purpose of the document.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Sure, we can fix that.
It just comes with the territory. Okay, well, I would so move that we receive the risk register update.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favour?
All right.
Yes. Carried. Thank you. Thanks, Gabby. And we're on to, sorry, I've got to scroll through lots of pages here. Staff delegations manual.
So I'm taking the paper as read. At the October Order and Risk meeting, the committee requested to see the staff delegations manual, which you can see in Appendix 1. The staff delegations manual has been developed to ensure transparency and to mitigate operational inefficiency. And the document aligns with the register of delegations to community boards, portfolios, committees, and the chief executive officer, ensuring that all aspects of organisational delegations have been covered through. The manual has been developed with consultation and with input from a number of activity areas and the executive team. The document has also been signed off by the chief executive officer. So from here, this document will be maintained as a living document and will be updated as needed. Happy to take questions.
Any questions?
I have some.
Okay, fire away.
They bounce all over the paper, sorry, there's just some things that I don't think align. So bear with me while I get myself sorted. So the first one is, if you go to the top of page 41 of our agenda, it states that in the third line down, it states, in the instance of the chief executive officer, the decision making may be subdelegated to an executive manager or the mayor. And yet when we look at the one up principle a further page down, in the instance of the CEO, the mayor will approve transactions. I'm not sure whether that's just because that's in relation to financial delegations, and why, if that's the case, they don't line up. There's probably a good reason, and it's probably because it's financial, but I just wanted to check that that wasn't at odds or an oversight.
Through the chair, if I can answer that. When the executive manager goes on leave, her delegation by default, because it's operational, is typically handed to an executive manager and it's quite formally documented. However, there will always be a few things where we need the mayor to sign off, whether it's around expense claims, and that's where we often get that one up principle. Recognising that the chief exec reports essentially to the mayor or council. They appoint, you appoint, council appoint the chief exec, which is why some things can't be delegated.
Sorry, I'm not,
Sorry, say that again.
no, I heard it, I didn't understand it.
Okay, so there's certain decisions that the chief exec can delegate to her officer, which is typically operational, but there's certain things she is not able to delegate to her officer, which is what's stated there, and that those bullet points around bylaws, to make a rate, to borrow money, dispose of assets other than what's in the long-term plan or annual plan. So in those situations, if our chief exec was on leave, the mayor would have to take those types of roles over.
I thought that was actually roles that couldn't even be delegated to the chief executive. They'll stay with council. Yeah, I think it's the paragraph before that you're a bit confused with, Tim, isn't it? I think there's some things that Sanchia may not, well, a chief executive may not want to delegate down, and instead would delegate up.
So, as chief executive, I'm also an officer, so there's certain things I can't decide. I need the appointment of a new chief executive, although I can appoint an acting chief executive.
Yeah.
So there has to be the caveat for the mayor there for those things an officer cannot decide.
Yeah.
And that's where, again, the conflicts of pecuniary interest, the one approval process is applied.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we go back to the top of page 41, circumstances where exec managers are involved in conflicts of pecuniary interest the one-up approval process will be applied. So Leanne, there's a pecuniary interest, so Sanchia signs off, that's easy. In the instance of the CEO, the decision-making will be sub-delegated to an executive manager or the mayor. So in an instance, and I'm obviously talking completely hypothetically here, not personally, but in an instance where the chief executive officer has a conflict of a pecuniary interest, the decision can be sub-delegated down to an executive manager who the CEO employs. Is there not risk inherent in that, and should it not just sit with the mayor?
No, I don't feel it's saying that, because it's saying in the circumstances where executive managers are involved in conflicts of pecuniary, the one-up approval process will be applied, but the decision-making, in the instance of chief executive, the decision-making may be sub-delegated. So that is when our chief exec is on leave and appoints an acting chief exec.
So that sentence isn't talking about the first sentence.
No,
They're two quite distinct statements, I think.
Right,
Confusion.
because it reads very much like it follows on.
I'll look at that.
Could I also just clarify, just to make sure we have covered it off, just in case? And so there are instances where you could argue, I would argue it don't, but you could argue I have a pecuniary interest. So for example, obviously there's a conflict I have in any contract that this council signed with Bribery construction, where you could argue there's a pecuniary interest there.
Yeah.
I have registered that in the conflict of interest. I'm not involved in any decision making relating to contracts with Bribery, the tender process, anything. So I've written all of that in, so it's dealt with. And for the purposes of any contract with that, which typically would sit with our property team, that decision making is delegated to Louise Van Ford.
Although in some situations, again, we've had the mayor sign off, so that because we can't.
Yeah, if it would normally require you, then in that instance, Tim signs.
And I've authorised us.
And I've read myself completely out anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think the example proves the point that if the CEO can't sign off on a big contract because of a perceived conflict of interest, is it safe for that signing off to be delegated down to somebody that the CEO employs? And I'm not talking about the personalities we have currently, obviously, but isn't there a risk of delegating down, even the same perceived conflict of interest? Oh, that person couldn't sign.
I think equally there can be a risk to delegating up to the mayor, who may not have the operational experience required to enter into that, or yes, it can go. I think it's about making sure we've got all of our bases covered on it. Typically, when the full duties of the CEO are delegated, we do that with a legal comment to the whole organisation. So there is a from this state to this state, and related to all the full delegation goes to that person. So it's sort of we do it that way. We don't typically do that for one decision, because the CEO is here and available. But I hear what you're saying, but I think just delegating up to the mayor wouldn't be right either. Because they don't, they also don't have the operational delegation to sign off on all expenditure operationally.
No.
You need people to do both.
Yeah.
Have other disciplines to call what's appropriate.
It's through the chair. I have done that in the past, where I have got your sign off, Tim, to authorise an executive manager to manage a particular contract for those reasons. But I am happy to look at the wording and see if I can just rephrase that slightly to make it a bit more clear, recognising this one had come through council, but I'll have another look at it. Gabby and I are working on the full delegation along with Rebecca for next year, so we will see how we can tidy this up.
It sounds to me like the process that you're employing works. It's just how to make it clear in the policy. That's correct.
Does that help address things?
I think I'm trying to solve the unsolvable problem. Okay.
It's really hard. I guess it's really hard to write a policy that tries to cover every eventuality, but does not hamstring the operations of the business from happening. But I hear your legal mind working on it.
Could be worthwhile us paying couple of scenarios just to test what would happen in this scenario and that scenario.
We'll have to word it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is probably what I'm ticking in my head. Okay, cool, thank you. If I may, Madam Chair, the next one, and I'm sure it's covered off somewhere other than these delegations, but I'm looking at page 45 where, and I've particularly, what brought this to my attention is acting appointments in an emergency. The CEO may appoint in an emergency and so forth. I don't see what happens here. In all due respect to Sanchia, what happens if Sanchia gets hit by a bus? What happens to all her delegations? There must be something somewhere else that says in the unexpected incapacity of the CEO, this is what happens. I'm not sure it's there.
It might not be actually.
But in that instance, it is council would have to appoint an acting chief executive.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
and it
and
would probably be done through the what's the little committee called? Not the emergency committee. The
Executive Council?
Yeah,
it's-
committee.
It does say right up front that that is something that is retained within council, which is the power to appoint the chief executive. It's not just the power, it's the responsibility for it. So I think it's kind of.
Oh, it is there. I just couldn't pick where it was. That's all good.
Yeah.
And it's because it's not there. It's in a broader scope. The next one, I'm batting none from 2 at the moment. 47, page 47. We have delegations to the chief executive officer up to 500,000. At A, it says up to a value of 500,000 to members of the executive team for an individual transaction. But when we go down to page, this is where it bounces about a bit, sorry. When we go down to page 56, we've got level 3 delegations to 200,000 and level 2 to 500,000. So it's just awkward bouncing around on a screen.
I can answer that through the chair. So although you have, the council has approved through the council delegations up to 500,000, and one of the executive roles, due to the nature of that particular budget, that has been at a lower level, just reflecting, because they can go up to 500, it doesn't mean that they need 500.
Emphasis is on the up to. Yeah, righto, cool. That makes so much sense. I should have seen it myself without having to ask.
I think it's good that we can ask the question and get the answer and assurance that it's there. I think that's actually good.
I like working in an environment where there's no such thing as a dumb question, particularly today, Madam Chair.
Yep, no, I think that's excellent. One comment I had, sorry, I thought this was excellent, and it had the references through to the policies as well, which was great because you're very, very clear where you need to go for further information. So it was a great document. And I had one query, and it's again, right, Tim, it's probably in here, but I just couldn't find it, was clarity around who has signing authority to sign legal documents. You've got financial approvals, which is one thing, but the actual authority to sign, but realising this is a council environment, not a corporate environment where I'm more used to that sort of constraint. So just wasn't sure where it's covered. I think that's in the main body of that particular, of the register of delegations. The chief exec, knowing that she could, but it's in here somewhere because this is the delegation. Exactly, delegation. That's in, what's this then? That's a manual. Manual, staff manual. This is the policy. That is a subset of this. But it might be that we do need to, let's complicated.
It's a decision made that we would have an overarching policy that's agreed by council. Then operationally you have that movement in the manual to shift delegation appropriately.
So if this is from council to you, where in here is that?
So you're in the staff delegation manual at the moment.
Right.
Which is the distribution of the things that are in the document Rebecca's holding, operationally, which is sort of consistent council practice now.
Okay. And so if we change any delegations,
they go to the chief exec to sign off.
And the document we're looking at. This document is changed by council.
Correct. Staff delegations are changed by the chief.
Right.
So for instance, if I have a manager that I think I would like to increase the delegations from 20,000 to 50,000, for example, I will take a memo to the chief executive for sign off, and then that will authorise Gabby to update the document.
Just one more thing, Madam Chair, and it will probably be my Lifetime Achievement Award for being a pedant. But on page 44, we've taken a portion of section 32.3 of schedule 7 of the LGA, and it has a typo in it. I don't know how we've done that because I'd have cut and pasted it myself. But it says a committee or other subordinate decision-making body, community board, or member or officer of the local authority, not of officer.
What page? So,
44.
You pick that up.
oh,
Yeah, page 44. This one here?
yeah, that's done.
Yes, got it. Thanks, Tim. Thank you.
Right.
Okay. Right, well, I will also move that we receive the staff delegations manual.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favour say aye.
All right.
Against? That's way tidy. It's probably not the typical term, but.
Yeah.
Fraud, bribery and corruption policy.
Soft review.
Notice I haven't called it a soft review. A review is a review. It's up for review and we're reviewing it. It's up, Gabby.
Taking paper as read. As mentioned, the fraud, bribery and corruption policy aims to protect the disclosures of whistleblower policy were adopted at the May 2020 council meeting. A review has been carried out on these policies and no changes have been made. The guidance from the Office of Recordable and other sources are being continually monitored, and these policies will be updated accordingly. With changes being brought back to order. You need to take questions.
Okay, so let's start with the fraud, bribery and corruption policy. Any comments on that one?
I don't except for the word error. Has that always been in the policy? Error? Except for the terminology that's used, that's sort of about error or something there. Has that always been?
It was in us 12 when we brought it to council, or it was 12 months ago. It would have been in next. We had not needed error.
Yeah.
Well, it's a defined term, a word or phrase. So you've got fraud, bribery, corruption or error, wrongdoing or error. I suppose it's nice. It's just showing that if you stuff up, you know, you're doing something, it's not intentionally wrong. That's different than being fraud. So
It's kind of more unintentional.
yeah,
Accountants will make errors when they're doing their annual report, for instance. They'll transpose a number or they'll enter a number wrong.
Yeah.
That is not fraud, and it's certainly not intentional. And you'll find most auditors will discover our errors because you don't hide them, because you don't know you've made them. But fraud can be intentionally hidden, which is why it's often takes a while for it to be uncovered.
so it's quite good, I think, to clarify that you're not going to get hung out to dry with this policy if you've made a mistake.
I hope not. There would be a horrible sense of people working in that kind of field.
Just for me, one thing that's missing, I think it's very, very good, but say anywhere it says, oh, sorry, I've got a typo, so if we can do that first. If you go to page 76, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 bullet points, sensitive expenditure policy.
Oh, yeah.
And it refers to a risk register, and the risk has been
lined out, but it should actually just be deleted because that's a separate register, isn't it? It's not the risk register where gifts and hospitality. So that needs updating. There's nothing in here. I know it says all instances or reported suspected fraud or bribery are going to be investigated. It says all investigations that have substance will go to the police or the Serious Fraud Office, but it doesn't talk about the internal consequences of the investigation, the outcome of the investigation, and you could well and truly be up for disciplinary action and or dismissal. That's the bit that's missing. I think there's a sentence that needs to be added about the ramifications as an employee, as well as the potential ramifications of criminal charges. They're two quite distinct things.
I will think about that, but because there's, again, the staff side of things will fall under a completely different process, being an operational to the chief exec and the people and capability manager HR.
Perhaps it would be a cross-reference, just that there is, we're quite often cross-reference between policies. Obviously, the staff policies are not appropriate.
It's not saying it's a decision of council, the outcome. This is a council approved policy on how CIGC is going to do things. And so it's saying, you know, all investigations found to have substance will go to the police. So that's the expectation, but there should be an expectation that if the investigation is bound to have merit, that there's disciplinary action and your dismissal.
So page 77 says if fraud, bribery or corruption is either suspected or appearing, it is to be reported immediately to the staff member's manager or the fraud control officer. Yep. The executive people and culture, the executive manager for services, then to report to the chief exec.
Yep.
So
and
that
they've
puts it straight. Then it's handled at that operational level.
I think it's okay that there is a sentence that perhaps just says that the repercussion of an arrest may include.
Yes.
So it's not committing to a certain outcome. It may include disciplinary process and ultimately termination of employment.
May and could, but you've got to have that potential agreement that you're not going to just investigate and do nothing other than charge them. So it's just that sentence, I think, that's.
And actually, they're not mutually exclusive either, because it could go to the police and be dealt with in that form and you still have employment, but equally, it could go to the police and nothing happens.
But you can
make a decision from an employment.
Exactly, and that was the bit that was just missing. So I think it's just probably in that introduction, but I think that would be needed. So that would be on page 76. It refers to in the bullet points again something called house rules, which aren't on the policy register at all, but seem to include quite a few things.
It's the easiest way I can answer that again, sorry. I'm not going to be you over here. No, it goes for it. Is that the house rules are currently written into employment contracts. They've been that way for many, many years. So at the moment, what we're actually doing, as soon as HR gets a very small HR team gets a chance, is removing them completely into a code of conduct that sits alone.
Good, because that was my query was, is this the word name for code of conduct? But at the moment it's embedded in everyone's employment.
Yeah, and it's not satisfactory because there's no ability, of course, to update. So
okay.
Now compared to 20 years ago are somewhat different. Actually, the requirements are somewhat different.
It's right. Does the contract have the ability to say, but if policies have overriding?
Yes, it does. But I think in good code of conduct practice, if there is an annual review or anything out, people are agreeing that we can assume that they've read and understood it, or they are each year actively signing up to proactively say we understand what the rules are and what our conduct should look like.
Yeah,
so we're trying to get into that space.
So that's what they are. Cool. Okay. Thank you. Right. So this is a policy which is a council approved policy. So we, with those two changes, one's an edit and one's an addition, we'd be recommending this to council for approval.
Report be received.
Yeah.
Yes.
Recommending it to council for approval and reviewed it.
Right,
That would be my motion.
In that?
Okay, all those in favour?
All right.
Right, against? And then we've got the whistleblower protected disclosures
Oh,
policy. So there's no suggested changes and I didn't have any questions.
Good.
Guys? But again, this is a council policy, isn't it? So we'll be recommending this to council for approval.
Again? Yeah.
Thank you. Against? Carried. Okay, Audit New Zealand. And internal audit update.
I'm taking the paper as read. So the Audit New Zealand Audit Action Register contains 4 remaining actions from the 2019-2020 Audit New Zealand annual report. Of these actions, 3 remain outstanding and 1 has been completed. There are 4 remaining actions from the 2018-2019 management report, which still remain in progress. So from internal audit, 2 recommendations remain in progress in the payroll area, and 3 actions in the cybersecurity area have been.
Questions?
A couple of things through the chair. I'm just, I couldn't find it easy to understand which of the outstanding actions that date from 2018, 2019. It seems a long time, obviously, but there'll be reasons for that. But I just couldn't pick up, without going back through past documents, which ones they were. It would be helpful to be able to have a, we've got an estimated completion date, most of those are blank, but it would be helpful to have a start date so that we can see the things that are getting a bit mouldy.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, estimated completion date can be put in at the time the audit action is sort of raised and agreed, and then we set the track.
Yeah.
Any slippage. So if first estimated completion date was, March 2020, we could clearly see that it's still outstanding and still pending. So I think that would be helpful. It's good, obviously, that they are getting cleared and it's a much shorter list. But yeah, estimated completion dates for every outstanding audit action would be very.
And
some of them were waiting on clearly our audit management report for this year. Yep. Because it's actually the auditors that sign those. The audit 2020 is last year's management report. We've completed 2021. We haven't seen a management report yet, and hopefully they have reviewed these actions. I'm not saying they have because I can't actually confirm that given the way the audit went. The 2019 ones were meant to have been signed off last year and weren't reviewed, or parts were not done, such as I'm not sure where we've got to with the bridges, but again, we need the auditors will sign those off.
Yeah. What we could have is we could have the comment, the management believe this is complete, sort of management completion subject to or something, which is in the comments.
We've done that in the comments, pending Audit New Zealand's annual report 2021, this should be completed.
Yeah, but so if we had sort of, if we had a completion date, say it was, April 2021, and you guys said we've done the work as at April 21, it's completed, then it's a little less outstanding. We're just waiting for final confirmation on the auditors. Yeah, correct.
Yeah, you referred to bridges, and it was one that I noted. It's a big piece of work, and it's going to be important in the future that we get this nailed.
Yeah.
So
The auditor's recommendation wasn't about the valuation of the bridges, it was that it was moved into the RAM asset system.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Julie's happy to speak on that because that's not as practicable as they've suggested.
So like.
Yeah, go
Yep.
for it.
To clarify what happens there. So, RAM was a software solution that was developed by the New Zealand Road Industry, as a collaborative piece of software that was then, sold, or the suggested that the software person buy it.
Yeah.
So they had done that, they subsequently sold it due to the acquisition. It's been developed, it holds roading asset data really well, it doesn't hold bridge asset data really well. So while a road is broken down to the certain things, base, the drainage, the signs, all the different components, a bridge is just a bridge. And as we know, there's many different types of bridges and there's different components to bridges. So you have to actually value them in a more detailed way. It doesn't enable that level of granularity to occur. So we need to, there's actually a national project underway that's being led by the Development Asset Management Data Standard for all transportation assets. But the bridging one hasn't yet been developed. They're working on that. Once that's finalised, then we will look at having a different software solution that will enable us to put bridges at least into it, if not other bridge as well.
So,
So the auditors don't really understand
No.
the system when they're making that kind of statement, because value of the bridges in the RAM system would deliver a poor outcome.
yeah, so that's where you get that situation where you have management believe this is completed. And we can look at it, we can hear that explanation and say, yeah, we agree, you know, because you don't always agree with the auditors. Just because they raise something doesn't mean you have to do it. But you've got to have a good reason why you're not. You can't just ignore it. But I think that's an example of, you know, otherwise it just sits there. And there's no point in sitting there because we're meant to be looking at what action items should have been completed. And that one's not going to be.
Well, it will in the long term, but not short term, and I hope you when that's
Exactly. So I think that, you know, completed, yep, we agree, take it off. Now they may raise it again, good on them.
We'll respond again.
It's same comment, and that's quite appropriate. I believe, yeah.
We'll update that for the next response.
Yeah. But on the internal audit report, we don't have dates on those. I think that would be helpful. Done, just to show again the ageing, the fine cheese of the outstanding.
But well, yeah, the due date was the 1st of the 3rd and we've moved it to July, so we've written that one there for the manual of the timesheet.
And the others
The
are
others
outstanding.
June 21.
June is still due.
Yeah, June 21, that is the due date.
Yeah, so June 21 is a wee while away.
I know, I appreciate that.
So, yeah, so if there's a new due date, update, because then it shows that it's been looked at and been considered. But I meant the date of the audit as well.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. And we used to get the internal audit plan. What's happened to that? That?
We agreed to it for the 3 years, so I hadn't thought to bring it again.
Yeah, we just need to keep an eye on what's meant to be getting done and is it getting done?
Absolutely, that's
We always have it in there just to,
happy to do that.
yeah. Just as an update, you know. Or this has to be deferred for what reason? Okay, that makes sense.
Well, I would so move that we receive the audit update.
Kim?
Thank you. All those in favour?
All right.
Against?
Aye.
Yep, Gary. Okay. Nearly got time.
Thanks, Gabby.
Financial report. Hello, Anne.
Hi. So I'll take the report as read.
Thank you.
The financial report, the financials for the quarter ended 30th of September had a surplus of 6.7 million, which is 2.2 million favourable to budget.
Income is 804,000 favourable, with expenditure also favourable by 1.4 million. And most of these variances are just due to timing. Accounts receivable has a balance of 1.5 mil outstanding, of which 1.3 is current, 152,000 is 30 to 60 days, and 60,000 is 90 days and over. Of the 60,000, the details are shown in the report. Also in the report, it's showing a current balance of negative 280,000, and that relates to register dog income that we receive through the debtors, but we haven't yet invoiced to offset that.
In our financial system.
Yeah. The investments as at 30th of September, council held cash balances of 17.3 million, of which 10.5 was held in term deposits. These have since matured, and we're just looking now at reinvesting a portion of it because the capital work hasn't yet been completed. The internal loans have a forecast balance for 30th of June of 4 million, and the external community loans, the actual balance at 30 September is 180,000. We're still waiting on written confirmation for sign off from Audit New Zealand. We've got verbal clearance a couple of weeks ago, and they've indicated that the final figures are correct, and there might just be a few minor tweaks to do to it. So happy to answer any questions.
I actually, sorry, I think it's a good report. So, I think it's got improved over the time that I've been sitting at this table. A couple of questions. Reinvestment, is it, are the banks indicating a higher interest rate?
I am going to do that today, and I'm just still looking at how much money we've got about 16 million in the bank now, but it's a matter of how long do we want to invest for. And last time I think it was only 1.3%. So it's not, it's not very good, and that was the 2 or 3 million, I think.
We do go shopping though to get the best interest rates through our banks. We basically email them out and look at the best deals we can get.
We are limited to how much goes to each bank though, aren't we?
Correct, 20 million.
Yeah. So the
The
other point I noted, and I guess this is more operational, is we're not reading the water meters on time and getting the invoices out on time. So
through the chair, there's a glitch with our contractor, and that has been worked on right now.
So it wasn't the fact that they haven't read the meters, it's
They haven't
read the meters.
Correct.
I think it was on and I think they've finished doing the common ones this week.
I believe that
and so
now.
they're all up to date now. And I don't think they had a backup.
Yeah, probably doesn't accept it really, is it?
No.
We're working with that because what has also hindered our contractors is the fact that we've had high growth in certain areas. And so we're actually reviewing, we can't change anything for this annual plan that we're in because we've already adopted the long-term plan year 1. But for next year, we're working with the contractors to look at splitting the read dates into, at the moment it's 3 times 2.
Yeah.
And we're looking at doing 4 times 2 to make that work. Because the numbers are growing and it's really difficult, particularly on Cromwell / Granite Group and Morals. We're working with them directly.
Okay.
Just through the chair, so it's actually quite a challenging activity for our contractors to undertake when we do it twice a year for 3 months, because it's only you're employing a person full time, but they're only active for 6 months of the year. So that's been part of the issue. What that steps in the step like are going to help that. We are taking a report to the council meeting next week regarding the 3/4 contract, because it's coming to the end of its term, and we have a proposal in that regarding extensions and changing contract scope. And one of the things that we are expecting to look at more closely in the scope is whether or not reading the meters sits best with the contractor, or whether that should be a role that's delivered internally. So that'd be part of what we look at, because there has been challenges in the past as well when you're relying on one person and somebody else to
Yes.
Recognised and hopefully underhand.
Okay.
Any more questions?
And I had a question about, on page 88, about accounts receivable. Just looking at the layout with the type of debtor, you've got a graph there that shows other building consents and resource consents. So what does other cover?
I'm not 100% sure, to be honest.
I'm sorry, I'm lost where we.
I'm thinking it's anything that doesn't fall into the building consents and resource, 1 point.
And rates?
No, it excludes rates. This excludes all rates. So this is, we have a number of
So
activities, contract, all sorts of things that we can't put under activity in the way that building consents, resource consents, and rates is outside of this. And that's managed in a completely different way, in a legislative way, prescriptive legislative way that does not sit under our receivables.
that's right.
So it's not that, it is a whole ton of stuff that we invoice for, but is not a definition that we can give you one definition. We could possibly look at how.
No, that's all right. I sort of assumed it. So where do rates appear?
They don't in this because, but we can report on rates, but we haven't typically done that. It's because we manage it in such a different way. So we invoice our rates every quarter. I report on that at the end of the 30 June, what is outstanding, because rates aren't actually due typically, like the whole service.
So it's a different
30
cycle,
June,
yeah.
so it's so different that at the end of June, I report as part of our updates, what's outstanding, what we're handing over to Debt Management Central. Our annual report includes a note on any debt we've written off, including rates, and we can only write rates off in a very prescriptive manner after 6 years where there's been no solution. And even when we write them off, they don't disappear from the property, they only come out of our liability. So it's a completely different process and totally different to the 90 days, etc. of a receivables.
And I suppose the other thing with showing current 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, whether it be useful to have some kind of trend to compare over time.
That would be.
Just
Is it getting?
worse? Is it getting better?
We can do that. We can, in fact, in our old world, we used to compare it to the exact same time a year ago. So happy to do that.
Or even just a line that takes us through, because otherwise all you're doing it's two snapshots, whereas if you can get that trend, it's even better.
So, Leanne, does that mean that if the debt stays with the property, if it's ever sold, we can recollect it?
Yeah, if the current owner does not clear that up as part of their selling the property, by default, unfortunately, the new owner inherits it. And so it's really important the two lawyers actually manage that process well. And lawyers know that.
Okay.
They ring councils for any outstanding water rates.
Yeah, at the time.
I think they're the only two that are attached to the property.
And just going back in particular to building consents and resource consents, if the debt is overdue and not paid, what is the status of those consents? In other words, do you have situations where people have proceeded?
I don't think the consent goes through until they're paid. They pay the deposit and then they carry on, but I don't think they get final consent till it's paid in full, do they?
I think when and you might know further, I thought we weren't able to withhold consent, but they don't get title. Is it something like that happens?
And I wish Louise was.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think back to one specific example, close to Highlands in Cromwell, and that fee had not been paid, and we held it for as long as we felt we could to try to get the payment. I think ultimately we had to provide the consent.
Yeah, I
I
think
can't
that's,
do withhold it, but it's.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that these debts are, the one I'm looking at, I'm sure that the person's carried on with their.
So we've got no leverage.
No, I don't think so.
Well, you've got the leverage and you don't let them
come back around.
No, I don't believe that either, because I remember asking that one, if they apply for a completely separate consent, I don't believe we can withhold them applying for that consent.
That's correct.
We've got to remember that we're
Cool.
essentially an agency of the Crown in doing this, and I don't think we can put our financial needs ahead of it. Unfortunately, we just have to go down traditional debt collection paths. There's one there that I'd like to go down, a particularly traditional debt collection path, but we're not allowed to do that.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I just,
Next time perhaps we'll be, that's good.
So thank you.
Apologies. for not-
Sorry. Thank you. I mean, yeah, that's excellent. So I will so move that we receive the report.
Again,
Thank you. All those in favour?
all right.
Against? Thank you.
Thanks, Ian.
Moving to report. Next one is asset management policies. Quinton.
Good morning.
All right.
I'll take the report as read. Council's current asset management policy was adopted in 2014. We've now worked through an update of that. So the updated policy provides the framework for Council to establish, maintain and improve its asset management system. It sets out Council's commitment to managing its assets and asset-related services effectively and sustainably to meet the needs of the community. The recommendation today is that the Audit and Risk Committee recommends to Council the adoption of the 2021 asset management policy. I hand back to the Chair for questions. Thank you.
Right.
I guess the only thing I would add is I'm really pleased that we're bringing it to you now, because the asset management policies should set the scene for the development of the asset management plans that then set the scene for the programs that go into the long-term plan. And often we're unable to get our ducks all in a row to achieve that. So I'm pleased in my second or third cycle of this in my current role, we've managed to get to where we want to be this time round.
I saw that in the roadmap.
Yeah. So I'll open up for any questions or comments.
So I did have a comment because I've written it down here. I think it's a huge piece of work, and is it achievable?
Delivering that ends.
Yeah.
It's always a huge piece of work. We think it is. As part of the development of policy, Lisa Roberts, who was the consultant before, she did the assessment, the audit of our asset management processes that in an earlier report that. So she sat down and interviewed all the staff, and we went through this with them to make, and that's how we've come to the belief that it is deliverable. Of course, it's always challenged if we have resourcing issues. But at the end of the day, we have to deliver an LTP. Really, and we have to deliver ads for the auditors. We have.
I've got a number of things as I work through that I've highlighted, Madam Chair. So moving to the very beginning of it on page 105, there for the plan itself. Firstly, sorry, pedant, there's a typo. Third line down in the actual table, seek council approval of the AMP to provide the basis, not provides. But more relevant, below that it says update AMPs to align with LTP when adopted, or add preface to AMP explaining changes. I'm just wondering that, now with a living document, when you go to it and you look at the piece you want and you see it and you box on, is there a risk in having a preface explaining the changes rather than taking, I accept, the longer route and the greater amount of mahi to actually put the changes into the asset management plan? Because it would be easy to miss something in a preface rather than actually change it.
So one of the challenges that we have, Tim, is that we go hard at delivering AMPs, and then the LTP gets produced, and it goes through that whole discussion and public consultation, and then the changes that happen to make sure the rating increases within acceptable levels. And so we need to come back to our AMPs to make sure we update them to say this is actually what got agreed in the long-term plan. And that doesn't actually happen. Typically the AMPs get done, we do the LTP, and 3 weeks later we come back to the AMPs again, and they're not even actually correct for the 3-year period that we're in, because once we've kind of got through the LTP, we kind of breathe a big sigh of relief and just carry on delivering programs that were funded. So we should be going back to the AMPs to say this is the implications of the decisions that we made.
So the AMPs themselves are updated?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that was Tim's point though. He was saying that it was just a preface.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is the AMP is updated and there's a preface explaining why it's updated.
Well, or what Lisa's saying there, if we're not, if there's a change made in the LTP that says, and say for example, we said we need a certain amount of money to do reseals on sealed roads, and then we reduce that amount, we need to put something in there to say, well, this was the amount that we calculated out as being necessary, however, this is what's being funded, and the implications of that change will be this. And that might just go into a update at the front of the document, or it could go into the content within the document. It's the same, either way, it needs to go into the document. Yeah.
Point exactly though, Julie, is there not a risk in it going in the front of the document that it will get overlooked? I don't pick up asset management plans every day, so I don't know how they operate, but you know, the living document dies because it's not updated properly, yeah?
Yeah, I think it's just, I don't think it would matter. I think that a person who picks up would know that there was a bit at the front that said these were the things that got changed.
But the changes are also in there.
Well, the preface would be instead of putting it into the AMP, they'd say it was prepared on this basis, however, here's what got approved and here's what didn't get approved.
Because NZTA funding, for instance, would also impact on this, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it is. It does.
And we got that sold last month.
We could just say update the AMPs. It is a big job to update the AMPs. I think that was the concern, that for some parts of the business, and then something in the introduction saying this is what's been changed.
But the risk for me is that you have, you know, we have changes of staff, things move on, there's a preface in the AMP, somebody picks up, you know, somebody new picks up the AMP and goes, well, there's our roading budget or whatever. The document should reflect reality entirely, not run the risk. You know, this is audit and risk. Is there not a risk there that things are going to get missed? If the wrong thing is in the AMP, but it's corrected somewhere else, the wrong thing's still there, yeah?
We can just take that sentence, shorten that sentence at the comma and take or add preface out.
We could put in.
Appreciate that. Well, I mean, I don't use them all the time. So if you think the risk is so ridiculously small, we don't have to. But yeah, if the payoff doesn't warrant the mahi that's going to take to do it, then we need to know that, because I don't use the things every day, but it would seem to be a risk.
Yeah, I personally think it is relatively low risk, because someone picking up an app to read through programs has had exposure to activity management planning in the past, so that is a first place to look. And depending on the update, it could be a significant rework of entire sections of AMP that could be just prefaced with commentary. And I mean, I have had in the past printed apps where I've made notes in the section anyway that I know and work off, and it's my living document almost as well.
Yeah, mine's got scribbles all over it.
Love my LTP.
Yeah, but it's fine. We can implement it. It's just we have to make sure we go back and do that after the LTP is adopted. That's that key point.
Okay, so we're going to keep it as it is, but because it's optional.
Okay.
Is that right, Tim?
Yeah, I think hearing what Quinton said and the way that it works for the people who use it and they go to the preface first and everything gives me some comfort. So I don't want to die in a ditch over it because I don't use the document every day. So with what QP said, I can live with it as it is, but my preference would be that it's actually in the document. But staff are stressed with work without looking for more things to do. Okay, so I can live with it as it is. Top of page 106, typo, stewardship of council assets, ensuring funds and resources are available, not funds are resources are available. But more relevantly, 4 bullet points below that. And I'm just wondering about the wording, approve asset management plans as the basis for the draft long-term plan. The basis might be going a bit far. I mean, you know, a crucial part of, but
so we prepare, like we'll do a life cycle assessment for what we think is required, and they are typically used then as the basis for a whole lot of that funding. I mean, the reality is that once you get into the long-term plan, you're not typically getting into the detail of how much exactly you're spending on unsealed road renewals versus unsealed sealed road renewals versus playground renewals. So they do form the basis for those renewal programs, which are a big part of the program. The thing that tends to get discussed through the long-term plan process is all the jobs that we would like to do but don't have to do. So they do kind of form the basis, but the improvement programs form a basis, but then they might get changed completely. So I think that what we're saying is we want people to prepare an AMP with evidence to support the program they're putting out to council as part of the LTP, not wing it and then back engineer it based on what the funding is they've got.
I get that, yeah. I get that, Julie, but your answer is probably goes to the point is that you're reading that line in the policy as a as head of infrastructure, whereas I'm reading it as mayor of the whole thing. So approve AMPs as the basis for the infrastructure part of the draft long-term plan. But if you look at the 4 big build projects we did as part of the long-term plan last time, none of them would have had an AMP attached to them because they were all brand spanking new. So I would think my point is approve AMPs as a crucial part of the draft long-term plan, but it's not from where I sit, it's not the basis of it.
So what projects would they have been done?
Well, Riverside Park, I'll just take that one.
So that okay, so parks and reserves do an AMP.
Yeah, but they didn't have Riverside Park in it because we never had it.
So I think you could say for the renewal and operations parts of that LTP then.
I think it would just be a simple say that, yeah, okay, yeah, that probably makes sense where this sits. It's just, these things can be read by anybody and that could be overstating it.
If we said for the renewals and operations parts of the long term, and it's those improvements that are often community led.
And the next one I have, and I'm sure I know the answer, but I just want to check, page 107, March to September 2022. Complete inspections and capture of asset information for above ground 3 waters assets and development of renewal and upgrade program. That I see that that's still relevant post mandation, but I just want to check that it's been looked at through that lens. It hasn't just sat there and not been looked at through that lens.
All of this has been looked at through that lens, and that project's actually underway now as part of the stimulus funding projects.
Expected it would be. Thank you. Page 108, second line down. Maturity targets are assessed as being appropriate to the importance, not important, and risk of council assets. So just a typo. I haven't got many more, but the next one. The next one's an interesting one, and I'm wondering about wording, and I'm wondering about how the wording will be read by anyone outside the organisation, particularly in light of current situation. 110, bullet point 3.5. The organisational focus is on the operating statement rather than the balance sheet. I'm not sure what that means, but I'm pretty sure how it might be read by some.
Can you repeat that, where that is, Tim?
So it's page 110 in the agenda, bullet point 3.5 over on the left, financial and funding strategies, and the second part of the aware line is the organisational focus is on the operating statement rather than the balance sheet.
That's a definition of maturity.
So that's a maturity definition that's it's a national and international framework. We don't define what these are.
And of note, none of our assessed maturity targets are in the aware section.
No, you're looking to be
Or
intermediate.
or better.
Yep.
With a significant number of them being higher.
Sorry, I didn't understand that.
So there's an international framework for basically assessing where you sit in terms of maturity. So aware is the lowest end of that in terms of section 3.5. For all our activity management areas, none come under that aware framework. It's either 4 or better in terms of our targets. So it's just spelling out, if you are doing it at that level, you are only aware.
Yeah, it's your starting point, then you worry about the money later.
Yeah, but what it's saying, Tim, is if you look at page 108, the guys set out where they want to be, and that's just giving us the definition of what, for example, intermediate means for financial strategy, and then you go to 3.5, and intermediate means 10-year plus financial forecast. It's the reference of this maturity scale.
Gotcha. That makes sense now. Thank you. I was reading it.
So you want to be down at aware or are at aware, and that's just this, that's the scale.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cool. Okay. Right, so subject to those amendments,
Sorry, we just need to clarify exactly what the amendments are. I only have one.
Oh, well, there's some typos.
Other than typos, I have one amendment, which was the addition for renewals and operation of the LTPs there.
And I've captured all.
And I've got a record of typos.
Yeah, no, it was just the, that bit about the LTP.
Thank you.
Okay. So I will move that we receive the report and receive the report and recommend to council that they approve the asset management policy. Thank you. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Cool. That's Quentin, that's great. Infrastructure then. Infrastructure construction projects, Julie.
So. It's a bunch of
And it'll go on the website, Julie. Sorry, Tim.
I've emailed it. I forgot my date. I have emailed it to Thomas Thomas. So, I'll just explain what that is.
Yep.
So I've taken my report as read. I think the key thing that we have been doing is implementing some project management software so that we can keep track of where we're at. And this is initially focused out either on the construction program within the infrastructure area. It does have the potential for the projects to enter into it. And the reason we've brought this in is around providing us a bit more resilience to staff change. Because what we've actually discovered is that due to the high number of projects that we have, the value of them and the number of different people that are now involved, we needed a better system for recording the information from that first exhibition right through to delivery, because information was getting lost in translation along the way. So this project piece of software will enable us to record those very initial strategic assessments when we do investment logic maps and we define problems and then work through what the solutions are. All of that will be included in the software. So as you'll see, we have $141 million of budgeted expenditure on capital projects, and that's across 45 different infrastructure projects that we've entered into the sentient software. I have Laura and Chantal in the room, and they've done the donkey work on this. It's been a really huge piece of work for us. And we're now in the final stages of it for that construction work part of the process. What we're currently working on is the integration between the Magic Finance software and the sentient software. And we expect that to be available for the next cycle of reporting that gets done on a monthly basis, and that happens on the 12th of the month. That's been selected because it's after we've got the contractor's claims in for the month previous. That information should have been entered through into the finance system by then. What will happen is there'll be a transfer from the finance system that says what the budget is and what the spend to date has been. And then the project managers are required to update forecasts through to the end of the financial year and then through to the end of the life of the project within the sentient software. One of our challenges has been that we need to be doing monthly updating of forecasts. And at the moment, that updating forecast happens in spreadsheets, and everybody does it at a different place. So it's really hard to get that information every month on where we're currently sitting. So the software will enable us to do that. And it's going to reduce the risk to council around issues happening, because we need to understand overall how we're tracking as well as at a project level. So I've handed out a dashboard. I didn't include this into the agenda because it doesn't include the financial information in it. And the reports that were attached don't include the financial information because of that integration still being done. It just is really being included to give you an idea of the kind of reporting that we can now do. And what it's highlighted, and I think that the first benefit of the software for us has been that it's identified where we have variability within our project management, the capabilities within our wider team. So what we're now working on is writing some business rules around things like how to assess when is a risk classed as a green, an amber versus a red, because in a room they will all do that slightly differently. And we need consistency in that risk.
Would you be using the risk assessment criteria that is in the risk?
Yes, we do. We've taken the council's risk assessment criteria, and that's the
Awesome. So all risks are assessments.
Yes. But what happens is some people will enter a lot more risks than other people will enter. So we're now developing some sort of what we would expect to be the minimum risks, that list of risks that would be assigned to a construction project. And then what happens is within the software, they will have a risk register, and it has a list of all risks for the project, the high level risks. It doesn't, they'll have a separate, very detailed project construction risk register. Those risks then get summarised up for the summary reporting, and of course, some people, if they have one orange and four green, will say, well, that's a green when it gets put up into the summary report. So the business rules are around saying, well, if there's an orange, then your risk is an orange. If there's a red, it's a red. You don't take the average of that.
Yeah.
So those kinds of little intricate things that you find as you start to produce reporting and you'll be able to see it here. This report was actually produced for me to look at, and so it's produced by program manager. Whereas what we will do for audit, or what we're proposing to do for audit and risk committee reports going forward is do it at a department level rather than going down to individual staff members who are managing programs. And we're going to put some rules around what we expect to be in the comments box too, because you'll see some staff members have been really quite diligent and have a lot of comments in there, while others have none. So that was, and this, to be fair, this was our first go. The staff have been familiarising themselves with it, and some of them are experienced project managers who work in the project team, whereas others are more generalist engineers. So I really just wanted to show this to you really as an example of what we're able to do, and ask if that's the kind of dashboard level reporting that will be useful. We are also looking at rolling it out more broadly. What we've found when we've started to do that just within the infrastructure team is that because of the, when you're not looking at construction projects, actually follow a fairly standard type of other types of projects that aren't construction, and they're not all about the monies, big budget things like asset management projects, new resource consent applications, strategies and bylaws. Every process is slightly different. And what Sentient has is it has different stages of a project, so they're easy to define, they're pretty standard, but when you drop down into that, then there's a checklist and a milestone page that comes up, and the checklist will say, have you thought of this, have you thought of this, have you thought of this? And milestones are, okay, when are you going to have your first report up to council? When are you going to have your background information completed? When's your first report to council? Public consultation, second report to council, finalising the strategy, for example. Obviously, if you're doing a resource consent application, that checklist doesn't apply. So we've kind of identified that we need to have a more specific checklist for different types of the non-construction area. What we've also identified is that within that part of our business, within infrastructure, as they are not people who are familiar with working within a project management environment. And so the more flexibility you provide within the software to do different things, the less intuitive it becomes. So you're taking the less intuitive part of the software into that part of the business that has the least capability. So we're going to have to do some work upskilling some of our team on project management process. But we also need to modify the software to suit the needs of the as well. And once we've kind of, the benefit has been identifying those kinds of issues that are not software development issues, they're more implementation issues. And if we don't get those sorts of things right within our part of the business, it'll be far more challenging rolling it out. So it is a work in progress. But we're pretty proud of where we've got to. It's been a huge bit of work which the girls have been leading, and they've been doing a lot of training with the staff on how to use the system. Instead of having the software provider come in and do the training, they do a train the trainer kind of approach. So the girls have been trained up to deliver that training internally. The staff are really engaging and getting good buy-in.
That looks awesome.
Yeah, it is.
So any questions?
So the integration of the financial reporting on a monthly basis, is it just a wee way away yet?
No, this month we expect that to come through. Like the dashboard report for the first month, I'm sure we'll find some issues as we get into it. We then have to refine. It's not until you really get in, we've done a lot of testing environments, but it's not until you get into the live environment. And then you start to say, well, hang on a second, it doesn't quite look right. So we would expect that by your next audit and risk committee report meeting, we will have
That's great.
And you, from a sort of project in particular, you need to give us any updates on?
We are having challenges, as most of the councillors will be aware, with regards to resource capacity within the industry. Materials delivery is becoming, and availability is becoming rare. And an example at the moment is we're trying to get aerators. I think every council in New Zealand's trying to get aerators. Christchurch, after the big fire that happened in Christchurch on that water site, the head up there are buying up all over the place. Even just things like getting power onto sites is taking a bit of time. So all of those things are starting to drive up, or are driving costs up. Material costs have increased significantly. We've had one report to council regarding the cost increases on the Lake Dunstan water supply, and there will be another one next week on the Clyde wastewater project. And these things are really just unavoidable. They're not due to any staff member. What we would say is that potentially some of the estimates were a little bit optimistic. I think that many councils are finding that. It is very interesting to see how different organisations are dealing with those cost overruns. There has been a report in the paper around how QLDC have dealt with a big cost overrun on one of their projects. Which was quite a different approach to the way we're dealing with it. I mean, you basically come down to two options. You defer some work so that you can fund your increased costs, and you increase your budget.
Out as sort of red and orange as the Clyde wastewater.
Yes, yeah, and so there's two things happening on that. One is the big boulders that they've been hitting. And the other thing is around the work on the private properties. So we have to get letters out to the private properties to get consent to enter their property. And we've actually hoping to get the first 30 properties letters out this month. We have discovered that we really need to send us different characteristics, and if we just send a generic letter out, some questions coming back, and working really hard on getting those letters done. The first group of 30 are probably the properties that have the simplest connection process with them, but a number of them we have to go through hard surface areas, or fences have to be dismantled.
So, Chair, just on that, Julie, getting the building consents, is that being grouped geographically, or?
No, that's just the whole lot altogether.
So what's the impact on the actual doing the work? Is it been?
So we've got the consents. We did a letter to the properties asking for them to give us consent to do building consents on their behalf. So the properties that have responded to that, which I think is a large proportion of them, we have progressed their building consent applications. We actually need to get a consent from the property owners though to go onto their site to do the work, and we never did that with the original letter. So part of the reason we've slowed down the process with communicating with property owners is to understand the full extent of work that we need to do, and what are all the different consents we need from them, and what information do they need from us to be able to sign things off, so that we're only writing to them once more instead of 5 more letters. So the consenting process is pretty straightforward, largely, but it's the dealing with people about what's going to happen when we go through their driveway.
Madam Chair, I'm just Yeah, sorry, Nigel, I'm trying to get my head around this. It's not easy. So there's only 30 letters gone out to so far, and they're to the easy ones. So they're obviously not numbers 1 to 30 of Sunderland Street or anything like that. They're all over the shop, right?
Yeah, and so that's just so that we can keep the contractors working through January on those connections while we talk with the next groups. They won't be going out a month apart. They'll be, we expect the first ones out before Christmas. The next ones will go out probably around the first week of January. When we're back.
The first group of letters hasn't gone out yet.
So there's no, they haven't gone out. We've been making sure that we've got all the information that we need to have for the letter, and we're sending out some public comms around the fact that we are contacting property owners and groups, depending on what the characteristics of the connection on their property are, so that they don't get their neighbours not saying, I've got my letter from the council, have you got yours, sort of style, blah, blah, blah.
So that is, I'm not a contractor, but I'm imagining site board are going to have to go from a house down here to a house up there with their big digger to the house over there with their big digger. That's awfully inefficient, and inefficient is another way of saying it's going to cost more, isn't it? Am I right? I mean, that seems to me to be a...
So it's not really inefficient because it's only going to be a little digger working on people's properties. And these are the properties that they can just, the property owners have agreed with everything on the alignment. It's just going through a lawn. We can get it in nice and quickly and reinstated. Whereas the others, there's going to be different types of techniques of work involved. It's all in town, in one town. It's all even within quite a close area. It's not like they're having to re-establish a long way. It might not be next door, but it might only be 4 houses down the street.
And then 6 houses down the street, and then 8 houses down the street, each time either driving a little digger or putting it on the back of the truck. So it has to be more inefficient. How is it that we're in a position with a job that was signed off in 2018 and these letters are going out now? This is news to me. That I know that we had the letters out for the consents, but this is news to me that we're only 30 letters in to however many properties there are here. I'm a bit surprised.
So we've got most of the information ready for all the 175 letters, but we want to make sure we've got opportunity for any property owners who want to come back and talk to us about any issues to happen. If we send 175 letters out in 1 week, all we're going to get is flooded with queries from 175 property owners. Whereas if we can just get the easy ones out, get them moving, get the contractor on with that work, then we can put them in groups so that Laura's dealing with people a manageable framework.
I'd understand that if we're going from 1 to 30 Sunderland, 30 to 60 Sunderland, 60 to 90, or why weren't these letters sent out in 2020 or 19? Or this seems to, I mean, what I'm worried about with budget blowouts, and I haven't had an opportunity to read the latest one, but what I'm worried about is that this is going to increase cost again. I don't know whether the 4.6 that I understand is waiting for me in the council agenda relates to this, but I kind of hope that it does in some regards, because I don't want another one.
So I'm just going to get Patrick to talk through the process of putting the connections in.
Well, I suppose what we've got, it's like Julie said, there is a small excavator. The program at this stage, they can do 2 in a day. Yeah, but you're right, the delay isn't good. We do have a contingency. We're submitting another report to you guys very soon on what the overall outlook of Clyde is. And on suggestion of the CEO, we're looking at the contingency on that as well. And we've discussed that with Nigel as well, because we initially had a 3.5% contingency, but we feel we may need more than that to cope with any of those sort of added delays we might have.
So just to clarify, Tim, we expected the connections on the properties to be relatively simple. the initial work we've done with the property owners has suggested this is not simple. That when someone else is paying for the work, the expectation of the property owners is far higher than it might be that they were having to make the kind of trade-offs that we're having to make themselves. So hence we've decided, okay, let's get these 30 going, because we can get them going quickly. Those people are going to be absolutely happy. They're going to sign their form, they're going to send it back to us, and we can get on with it. The thing is that we can't get on with it until people give us the form back, and people won't give us the form back until they're happy that all of their questions have been answered and they understand what's happening. We've decided that it's better to take the time to make sure we have our communication with them clear and easy to understand in their language, rather than sending out something that would have suited us maybe 3 or 4 months ago. I would be also fair to say that we are learning a lot as we go through this project. There's not a lot of these done in New Zealand, and particularly where the work on the private property is being done by the council. So it is the work on the private property that is causing the challenges, because if you've got someone saying, I don't want a pumped sewer on my property, I want to have a gravity fed one through my neighbour's property, you know, we're having to work through, okay, what is our approach to dealing with those people? What are the trade-offs that need to be made, and how, what's the answer going to be, so that the next person who comes along gets the same answer. And we think that by doing it this way, we'll be able to process all the land entry consents a lot faster and keep the work moving than we would if we just went out with 175 standard letters and then spent ages trying to sort out people's issues. So while it might be slightly more in establishment costs, it'll be a whole lot less if we're able to keep the contractor productive constantly. I don't think those establishment costs, moving 5 houses down the street when they can only do them 2 a day, is going to be high.
I didn't realise that it's only 2 a day. That does have bearing on that. But I'm surprised that it was ever contemplated that it would be easy putting a digger on people's property. There's always going to be a headache, and it comes back to why wasn't this process started a lot longer ago? We've had this plan since 2018.
Yeah, so we thought that when we got the consent to do the building consent for them, that would be enough. We've had legal advice to say, no, you need to get a specific consent to go onto the property to do. So,
well, plainly, because people will want to know the details of which flower beds are getting dug up and so forth.
Yes. Yeah. And so the staff have been out there identifying all that. We've got all that documented for every property. And so the letter that goes to every property is quite specific, depending on what is happening on the property.
As we've got what we've got, but it's still, it troubles me. But anyway, where we're at.
Yeah, I found this frustrating as you too, Tim, I suppose, because we've actually visited the properties more times than we would have liked, because we've, like Julie says, we've learned a bit about the process. There's a big difference between an individual ratepayer doing a house connection than it is council doing a house connection on a ratepayer's behalf. There's a much bigger gulf than I would have ever anticipated.
Yeah. I've probably said enough.
But I think I know, yeah, I hear your pain, but the thing is, the reporting indicates this pain, which I think is, from our perspective, good. We can see it's coming through, and that's the key thing from the committee's perspective, is that visibility that it's giving us, which is great. Yeah. Okay, right, we'll also move that we receive the report. Thank you. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Right. Sure. Hello. Sorry we're running late.
Can I accept this as read?
You can.
Were there any questions?
Cool, so do we have any questions? I think Satch, you just wanted to cover things briefly from a COVID perspective.
Yeah, I guess just separate to the report because it's such an evolving piece with COVID-19. I'm happy to talk to a little bit of that, beyond what's in the report that Rachel's procedure. We'll go ahead and do that.
Yeah, do that, and then we'll just do any questions.
Well, so, yesterday we made public an announcement, of a series of decisions that I've made as PCBU under the Health and Safety at Work Act, some of our facilities. And have advised, staff, election members and members of the public that we will be requiring vaccine passes for all people aged 12 and over at our swimming pools, high sites and libraries. And we undertook quite a comprehensive risk analysis, through all roles in the organisation, the risk potential target, the levels of public that intermingle in certain places, and considered things like the upcoming school holidays and increasing September on 15th of December. And as a result of that risk analysis, we determined, and I decided that our pools and libraries and IFA were our highest risk areas at this point. And so we've determined that from the 10th of December, they will require a My Vaccine pass for anybody entering those facilities. There is, of course, other council facilities where members of the public and staff intermingle, and we're watching brief on those. We'll continue to monitor and risk assessment on those sites as the situation develops. Pretty dynamic. So, yeah, that's where we're at. It's I would just add, those decisions are not easy ones to make. We never look to exclude portions of our community from our services, and we are thinking very hard how we can continue our services as possible in a contactless way come the 10th of December. That is obviously very difficult with a swimming pool, but in terms of library services and eyesight services, that's something we're looking at how we can continue to do. And all I can really say is that it's just through that really comprehensive scenario planning risk analysis that we landed at the spot. We are receiving some public comment on those decisions, especially through social media channels. I am receiving a number of letters which I will respond to directly from people that are not happy with the decision that we have made to require My Vaccine passes. I think that response is anticipated. It is happening nationwide, and I think everyone from cafes to councils across the country are experiencing that dialogue. I have also received quite a lot of private thanks. There are people that are a little bit afraid to publicly say, hey, thank you, that I feel like you're keeping us safe. And I can understand that because it's quite vocal, especially on social media. But I feel pretty resolute in the decisions we've made. I think we've struck the right balance. It is somewhere between the higher measures some neighbouring councils have taken and the lower measures other neighbouring councils have taken. That wasn't by design. It was that I think our risks are somewhere in the middle. And I think that the measures we've taken represent that. Thanks. Any questions on that?
Or anything on the report itself?
I just had one. I noticed that what took me a wee while because I was getting confused, but the graph is repeated. So we've got worker incidents is actually public incidents. And there's no worker incident graph. So
yeah, it's almost all the same graph, right? So yes, that is right. So the work incidents should be 2 COVID related process breaches, 3 trips and slips, 2 near misses, and 1 customer aggression in the first quarter this year.
the COVID breach.
So when we went into our lockdown in August, we did have staff moving around doing
as providing essential services. So any instance where they were approached by a member of the public who wasn't wearing a mask, we did ask them to log that in our system, so we're aware. Yeah, so only 2.
Just a comment through the chair, page 132. We see that the total recordable incident rate is 8.52 out of 100 employees. As a member of this board, I've got no idea whether that's a good number or a bad number or an intermediate number. Data in isolation like that tells me nothing, sorry.
You have a target?
No, this is actually the first time we've calculated this rate for this organisation.
Okay.
That's good.
It'll be a baseline.
Yep.
My experience of this is that the organisation is relatively on the small side for a head count. It's about 226 employees. So these numbers hitting over 5 would be considered in health and safety to be kind of higher, but you see those numbers in a smaller organisation as opposed to one that has thousands of employees.
But this is per 100 employees, so it doesn't matter how big the organisation is, it should still be, that gives it a relativity. I suggest that if we could get that as a graph, so we can see the trend over time, that would help. And that insight of, 5's about right.
Yeah.
Or 5 to, when you start to get worried, is it 10?
Yeah.
And if you're in the band, then all is well. That would be, I think that's when data becomes information.
Sounds good.
There is, definitely we can do the graph, etc. But there is always that challenge about what's reported.
Oh, yes.
And so if you have an environment of high reporting, you may capture more, which may indicate a higher number than if you're in an environment where people don't do that.
Yeah.
This becomes interesting as well.
Yeah, I think do you report near miss? That's another sign of good reporting, is how many near misses you're getting reporting. And I think there's kind of sort of health and safety ratios that near misses should, if you've got good reporting, there should be a much higher ratio of near misses versus actuals. And I can't recall what that ratio kind of generally accepted is, but
I can bring that into the reporting.
Yeah, that can be good, because that does show that.
And it gives the context to the total.
Exactly.
Yeah, and we have been trying to communicate out there in organisations that reporting is good as well. So when you start sort of promoting that, sometimes things go up as well.
Yeah, and I assume you have an incident register that then is incidents cleared, it's reviewed and so things?
Yes, that's right. So they come into the system and then they are reviewed by myself and the line manager for that person, and then they have either recorded actions or they get archived.
Yeah. So perhaps because we get there were 30 incidents recorded during the reporting period, but we don't have the all are cleared.
How many were closed? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful to just know that the closure rate is happening. Otherwise, all you've got is potentially an incident. I'm not saying
no,
but we don't know that it isn't just an ever-growing incident.
Yes, no problem.
We just or something. Yeah. Oh, that's good. Any questions? Okay, well, I'll move that we receive the report.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favour? Aye.
All right.
Against? Okay, we're going to have a quick break. Okay, we'll go to the run. Yeah, we're not having a break. Okay, I have nothing to report. Is anything to report?
Madam Chair.
Move to the governance report, and that is just the fourth work program. Very good, thank you. I move that we receive the report.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favour?
All right.
Against? Carried. Note the date of the next meeting. Don't need to do anything more than that. It'll be interesting what everything looks like by February 22, won't it? Goodness me. Okay. And we now have a resolution to go into non-public. I so move.
Second.
Okay, all those in favour say aye. Against? Carried.
So we'll see you on the other
On the other side, I'm going to go make a quick cup of tea. Is that okay?
Yes,
Can
yeah,
we-
and we're closing the public meeting.
Ending now.
Now we're only 10 minutes
You can
behind.
have a quick.